Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbiMTG. For today's video, I wanted to show you guys this deck that I put together at pre-release. This was by far the best deck that I had during my pre-release events. I played in 3 of them, but this one by far was just the best in overall record, and I think just in overall card quality and playability. I think this one was really strong, especially for the way that the limited format ended up shaping up for pre-release. So I want to kind of talk about why some of these cards were good in the format, how this deck played out overall, and it should just be a pretty fun video, getting a chance to kind of talk about the Ravnica Allegiance Limited and showcasing this deck that I managed to put together during one of my pre-release events. Before we do begin though, I want to quickly say, if you guys opened up some sweet cards at your pre-release and are looking to, make some money off of them instead of just having them sit around in your trade binder forever, if you guys wanted to go over to cardsphere.com right now, you guys can go ahead and start trading off some of your Ravnica Allegiance cards already. For Ravnica Allegiance, at the beginning of each new set, starting from pre-release until a couple weeks later, there's generally on CardSphere a little bit of a promotion that goes on where they remove any trade fees on pre-release promos as well as cards from the newest set. So if you have any pre-release promos that you want to trade off, or any Ravnica Allegiance cards that you guys want to trade off, now is a fantastic time to do so over at cardsphere.com. So with that being said, and the quick little sponsor announcement out of the way, we'll go ahead and get into this video now. So we have this sweet little Mardu build that we put together here. As you guys can probably tell from the fact that we ended up playing Mardu, the guild kit that I chose for this one was Gruul. Yeah, my Gruul cards were just very, very bad. I was looking for cards like Rhythm of the Wild and Frenzied Airings, and I opened up I think one of each of those, but the rest of the pool was just really mediocre, and I ended up opening up just like some fantastic black cards, even though I chose Gruul as my guild. And it's really important that even though I chose Gruul as my guild, to take a look at all of my options. And so I had a friend kind of, helping me put together his deck. This was the second pre-release event. He was only going to do the one at midnight, so he came over, just sort of helped me, sort everything out, put together this sweet little build, and it ended up going undefeated. Not only undefeated in the fact that I didn't lose a match, but undefeated in the fact that I didn't even lose a single game with it. This deck was really, really powerful, and so we're going to go ahead and talk about each of the cards. So what ended up happening was the deck turned into a sort of more aggressive Mardu build compared to some of the other builds, but at the same time, even though it was more aggressive and we were playing aggressive cards like the Spear Spew, oh, I forgot that I don't need to click on those, they just show up when I hover over them, my apologies. So we have cards like the Spear Spewer, which again is a very aggressive card. It's something that's definitely for more of a Rakdos build instead of a Gruul build, and so we had the aggressive cards like that. Aggressive cards like even Gorklan Wrecker, which again, even though it has the Riot mechanic, worked out pretty reasonably for this deck. But it had some late game potential to go on with it as well. It had cards like Ethereal Absolution, which again is probably the most busted card in Ravnica Allegiance Limited, most likely just the best card in Ravnica Allegiance for draft and sealed. Definitely for sealed, and then for draft, it's probably still going to be the best card. It just gives you so much late game potential, just churning out 2/2s later on in the game, and filters out your dead draws. If you have extra lands, you just put them onto the battlefield and turn those extra lands into some 2/2 flyers, which again is crazy. And then shrinking some of your opponent's creatures as well works out really well. So it had the potential to go late game, and because of all of the Afterlife creatures, like for example the other rare that was in my deck, Tithe Taker, has Afterlife on it, so we were able to churn out again some more of those flyers. There were some other cards here with Afterlife, like the Imperious Oligarch and the Orzhov Enforcer, as well as the Ministrant of Obligation, which again had the Afterlife mechanic. So we had the potential to go later in the game with these Afterlife creatures, or we could just get off to a really aggressive start slamming them with 2/2s. Most of the deck most of the cards in my deck are just kind of like more aggressive 2-drops, and it made for a really solid playable deck. So again, we'll just kind of go card by card here and talk about why these cards were so great in the specific deck. Spear Spewer, really aggressive. I liked it for the specific build. Also turns on Spectacle right away for if you have some Spectacle cards like the Blade Juggler here, where you really want to cast it for its Spectacle cost and not so much cast it for its 5 mana, and you would much rather cast it for the 3. So Spear Spewer to turn on some Spectacle and get in some extra points of damage. Twilight Panther was a little bit more of a defensive creature, but because it's an activated ability, you have the chance that sometimes you can just attack into a bigger creature and they can't block it, because for 1 mana you can just make your 1 mana creature trade for their bigger creature, so you can sometimes get in through a couple points of damage with this small little 1/2 here. Imperious Oligarch, this card is just fantastic. Having the ability to be a 2 mana 2/1 for vigilance for, again, like I said, 2 mana, it really changes up the race situations, because you have something that you can block with if you need to, and you can poke through some points of damage. If you manage to just play this thing on turn 2, you can really get it down quickly, and people don't really want to trade for this because you get the upside from trading. They don't get any upside from trading unless their creature also has Afterlife, and creating the 1/1 flyer again can be good to just poke through for some extra points of flying damage with the Oligarch. Orzhov Enforcer, again, has Death Touch, so they couldn't really swing into it with big creatures. There was like this awkward board state where my opponent had like Sharkdo Crab, Gruul Spellbreaker, and just some other like crazy card within the Teamer colors that was just a really big creature, and he just couldn't attack because I had an Orzhov Enforcer and like some random garbage cards that I didn't really care about, just like blocking with, and so he just couldn't attack, and he was he was sitting there saying about how the Orzhov Enforcer was like the best card in my deck because he just couldn't attack through it. Little did he know he didn't get a chance to see the Ethereal Absolution at that point quite yet, but yeah, the Orzhov Enforcer definitely put in some work. Plague White here, again, just a solid little 2-drop. Also pretty good for attacking, because sometimes they don't really want to block with it, because you can get some favorable attacks with it because of the -1/-1. So again, it's a nice little way to turn on Spectacle. I think this card is like secretly a Rakdos card, but also just works out perfectly in your Orzhov decks if you need it as just a 2-mana card. But it really does, it's one of those cards that they can't really block all the time, and so it does help to turn on Spectacle, which is super, super nice. Rakdos Trumpets here, again, one of those cards that could be a nice little aggressive way to start off a game, but then later on in the game turns into a mana sink and we can get in for some extra points of damage. Tithe Taker, again, small way to start off the game a little bit more aggressively, a little bit of attacks if they want to play some instant stuff on my turn, for example, or activate some of their abilities, but mainly was just kind of a 2-mana 2/1 with Afterlife, which was more than enough to make it playable in the deck. Bloodmist Infiltrator here, again, just another way to push through damage later on in the game. Normally, it's pretty easy to block it as just like a 3/1, but because we had so many cards with Afterlife, I don't mind sacrificing a Tithe Taker or sacrificing the Oligarch, for example, or even the Ministry of Obligation to the Bloodmist Infiltrator, because I'm pushing through damage and creating some flyers, which again are pretty much evasive creatures that can get in for extra points of damage too, which was super nice. The Ministry, I already talked about it. Basically, its main goal is to just die. That's all you want this card for. It trades up, or it could trade with like another 3-mana creature that your opponent has, and then you get the 2 Afterlife Spirits for it, or you can use some way to just sack it on your own for some additional value, which is nice. The Grudian, again, kind of a more defensive creature, but sometimes if they had more, some bigger creatures, you could push through some damage with it because they don't want to block it. The Roostabout, again, very aggressive creature, trigger Spectacle, whether it's blocked or isn't blocked, so I do like this card in Rakdos a lot. The Wrecker, probably one of the weaker cards in my deck, but does have the potential to just be a 2/2 with 2 different keywords on it, or the potential to be a 3/3 menace, which, again, both of those sound pretty reasonable for 4 mana. The Scavenger, this card was super surprising. I saw it and I read through it and I was like, man, this has a lot of text for a 4-mana 3/3. I think it's going to be okay, but once you play out the games with it, the card turns into like a really, really solid common. You really don't mind sacrificing those Afterlife creatures, like I said before, and getting the ability to make a 4-mana 5/5 and then scry 2 to filter out your next couple of draws again. Absolutely fantastic for the Undercity Scavenger. Really, really impressed with that card. Blade Juggler, again, this card's fantastic. 3-mana 3/2 that draws you a card. You play that all the time. Again, you really want to cast it for its Spectacle cost, but even if you're not casting it for the Spectacle cost, in the worst case scenario, you're still going to draw another card from it, so it replaces itself, meaning it's pretty reasonable. And then Rebel Belt Recluse, again, 5-drop here, 6/5, attacks each combat if able. I believe one of the commenters in my video said that that's more of just reminder text instead of rules text. You're just going to want to turn this thing sideways all the time anyway, and the turn when it first comes out and actually can block, they really don't have any good attacks either, because most likely the Rebel Belt Recluse is going to be the biggest creature on the board, so you can maybe block with it for the first turn, or at least stall them from attacking the first turn because you suddenly played out this giant creature, and then you get to start hitting them back with this giant creature, which is nice, and they basically have to chump block it all the time because 6 power is a lot. Next up for our non-creature spells, we had 15 overall creatures in the deck, which is very solid for an aggressive deck. Maybe you wanted an additional 1 or 2 for it to be truly considered a limited aggro deck, but our spells were just so good. Final payment here, fantastic removal spell. We had those afterlife creatures that we could sack to the final payment to really get some additional value out of it. Or again, since we were an aggressive deck, you could just pay the 5 life knowing that you're going to kill them before they can kill you, and so you can just pay the 5 life and not really care at all about it. So final payment, fantastic removal spell. Wish I had more of them. Speaking of having more of a removal spell, 3 copies of Scorchmark, which was absolutely fantastic. I think it was likely that this deck could have just played out as Orzhov and been perfectly fine, but I really wanted to add in the red cards because of the 3 Scorchmark. Just, it's hard to say no to 3 premium removal spells just sitting there in your pool and choosing not to play them. So I had to throw in some Scorchmarks here. 3 of them is just so much. Followed by 2 Consecrate Consume. Most of the time you're not casting this for Consume, so I basically put it in on my curve as a 4-drop. You want to, or I think I said you're not casting it for Consume. You're not casting it for Consecrate ever, pretty much. It's very rare occurrence. Maybe if you're 2 mana and you don't have your 3rd land drop and you just need to cycle it to maybe hit your 3rd land drop, then you can cast Consecrate. But all the time you're casting Consume. Consume is just a fantastic removal spell, forcing them to sacrifice the creature with the highest amount of power that they have, which most of the time is the creature that you would want to remove anyway, and you get some additional life gain from it too, which can be super nice too. So in the mirror where it was like Rubble Belt Recluse versus Rubble Belt Recluse, I had mine, they had theirs. It was really nice that I was able to attack in with my Rubble Belt Recluse, get in for 6 because they chose not to block, they didn't want to trade Rubble Belt Recluse, and then I was able to use Consume post-combat to then gain an additional 6 life and make them sacrifice theirs after I had already just hit them for 6. So that turn was a huge tempo swing in my favor and really just showed the power of Consume. One of my Consecrate Consumes was foil. Not that it matters because it's not going to be a very expensive card, but it looked pretty nice too. It was a very nice foil, especially again the Consume side looked very nice in foil. Then we got on to the final 2 enchantments. We already talked about how busted Ethereal Absolution is. This card is just insane. If you get it, you play it. There's no doubts about it. And then Ill-Gotten Inheritance was a card that I kind of thought was not going to be great, but eventually I saw some people playing with it, and the card just ends up being absolutely busted. Turns on Spectacle every turn for you. Again, I didn't have a ton of Spectacle. I had cards like the Blade Juggler, but this wasn't really the best deck for Ill-Gotten Inheritance, but as an aggressive deck where you're just beating in with 2 power creatures, trying to get them to a low enough life total and just constantly putting in through damage, the Ill-Gotten Inheritance was a fantastic way to just finish them off at the end. Gets in for an additional 2-3 points of damage each upkeep, or not each upkeep, but on upkeeps overall throughout the course of the game, and then you use that 6 mana ability to just finish them off for the final 4 points of damage. It really puts a clock on your opponent, and the life gain is not irrelevant at all. It's definitely relevant, especially when people are trying to do the same thing as you and running these smaller creatures, trying to just beat in for as much damage as possible. And then we put together a pretty solid mana base in terms of guild gates: 1 Orzhov guild gate, 2 Rakdos guild gates, and then we ran 5 plains, 5 swamps, 4 mountains. I think that's pretty much the best choice we could do for the mana base here. I'm trying to think if there was anything I would have done differently, and I honestly don't think there was. I think the mana base is probably the best setup for a mana base that we could have had, based off of what we had. In terms of the basic lands, I think that mathematically, though, that's the best combination. Even though it was like 4 or 5 in the morning and we were pretty tired, but still coming up with a mana base, I think that was probably the best mana base to come up with. And yeah, I think this deck was just really solid. Of course, I want to know about your pre-release experiences down low in the comment section. Be sure to let me know how you guys did at pre-release. Did you also have a deck that didn't drop a single game? I'd love to know what kind of a deck that was for sure, so that we can compare my deck to your deck, maybe see if we were running similar cards, and then maybe had like a similar plan where again I was aggressive but had the potential to go later on in the game as well. I think this deck was just fantastic. So yeah, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Let me know how you did at your pre-release events down low in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys here next time. Thank you all so much for watching today's video where I talked about my undefeated deck from the Ravnica Allegiance pre-release. At the end of all of my videos, I love to give a huge shout out to my patrons for the month. So huge shout out to Jeremy, Jason, Daniel, Rodrigo, Down Under MTG, Jayati Swarren, and Battle of MTG for supporting me on the Patreon page this month. Definitely means a lot to me. Thank you so much to you just for making it all the way to the end of the video. Sometimes it can be a pretty hard task to listen to me talk for 15 minutes, but I greatly appreciate the fact that you were able to do so, and I'll see you guys next time.